There follows now an account of how the Athenians reached the position of such growth, when the Persians had retreated from Europe, defeated by the Greeks at sea and on land, and the remnants who fled in their ships to Mycale had been destroyed. Leotychidas, the Spartan king, who had been in command of the Greeks at Mycale, returned home with the allies from the Peloponnese. But the Athenians and the allies from Ionia and the Hellespont, who had now revolted from the king of Persia, stayed on and began a siege of Sestos, then still in Persian hands. They overwintered there and finally took the town when the barbarians abandoned it. After that, the allies sailed back from the Hellespont to their own homes. Meanwhile, the Athenian people, rid now of the barbarian occupation of their land, immediately began to bring back their children and women and their remaining goods from their places of safekeeping, and set about the rebuilding of the city and its walls. Only a small part of the circuit wall stood out, and most of the houses were in ruins. The few intact houses were those in which the Persian high command had been quartered. The Spartans could see what was coming, and arrived at Athens with a delegation. They themselves would have preferred to see neither the Athenians nor anyone else in possession of fortifications, but they were mainly spurred by the insistence of their allies, who were alarmed at the much increased size of the Athenian navy and the bold approach they had taken to the Persian war. The Spartan request was that the Athenians should not fortify their own city, but should actually join with them in demolishing any city walls still standing outside the Peloponnese. In making this proposal to the Athenians, the Spartans concealed the mistrust which was their real motive, arguing instead that if the Persians returned to attack, there would then be no fortified place which they could take as their headquarters, as they had recently done at Thebes. The Peloponnese, they said, could sufficiently provide both a refuge and a base of operations for all of Greece. On the advice of Themistocles, the Athenians managed to get rid of the Spartans and their proposal by replying that they would send delegates to Sparta to discuss the issues raised. Themistocles then recommended that they should send him to Sparta at once, and elect other delegates to join him. These should not leave immediately, but should wait for as long as it took to build the wall up to the minimum defensible height. The whole population in Athens at the time, men, women, and children, should set to work on the wall, sparing no private or public building which would help the construction, but demolishing them all. So with these instructions given, Themistocles set off for Sparta. On his arrival, he did not present himself to the authorities, but kept delaying and making excuses. Whenever any official asked him why he was not appearing before the assembly, he said that he was waiting for his fellow delegates. Some other business had detained them, but he expected them very shortly and was surprised that they had not arrived. Their friendship for Themistocles led the Spartan authorities to believe what he told them, but as others kept arriving with clear statements that the wall was under construction and already reaching a good height, they could not discount this evidence. Aware of this, Themistocles proposed that rather than allowing the influence of hearsay, they should send out some of their own worthies to see for themselves and bring back a reliable report. So this they did, and Themistocles sent a secret message to the Athenians about these envoys, telling them to detain them as unobtrusively as possible and not let them leave until he and his party were back in Athens. By now his fellow delegates had arrived with the news that the wall was in a sufficient state. His fear was that when they learned the truth, the Spartans might then refuse to let them go. So the Athenians, as instructed, detained the envoys, and Themistocles now finally came before the Spartans and openly declared that Athens was by now sufficiently fortified for the safety of its own inhabitants, and that if the Spartans or their allies wished to make any representations in the future, they should come on the understanding that the Athenians took a clear view both of their own interests and of the common good. Themistocles and his colleagues pointed out that when they had seen fit to abandon their city and take to their ships. This bold decision was taken without reference to the Spartans, and in all subsequent joint deliberation, their advice had proved second to none. So now, too, they saw fit that their city should have a wall, for the greater benefit of their own citizens and the allies at large. An equal and fair contribution to decisions on common policy could only be made from a position of equal strength. So either, said Themistocles, the whole alliance should lose their walls, or the Athenian action should be approved. On hearing this, the Spartans showed no anger against the Athenians. The ostensible purpose of their original embassy had not been to limit Athens, but to suggest a policy for the common good. And besides, they were then on particularly friendly terms in the view of the Athenians' determined stand against the Persians. Nevertheless, without showing it, they were vexed at the failure of their plan. The delegates from both sides left for home with no complaints made. So this was how the Athenians walled their city in short time. To this day, the signs of hasty construction can be seen. The foundations are laid with all sorts of stones, some of them unsquared and placed just as they came in, and mixed among them are many gravestones and other pieces of sculpture. The circuit of the city wall was enlarged in all directions, and in their rush to complete it, no building was spared demolition. Themistocles also persuaded the Athenians to finish the building of the Piraeus, on which a start had been made earlier, in his year of office as Archon. He could see the virtue of this place with its 3 natural harbors, and realized that becoming a seafaring nation was the key to the acquisition of power. He had been the first to advance the proposal that the Athenians should take to the sea, and now he was quick to help lay the foundations of empire. On his advice, they built the wall round the Piraeus, to the thickness which one can still see. It was wide enough for 2 wagons bringing up the stone from opposite directions to pass each other. The interior of the wall was not rubble or clay, but the whole structure was made of large blocks of stone, cut and squared, with clamps of iron and lead on the outer faces. The completed height was about half of what Themistocles intended. His plan was to frustrate any enemy designs by the size and thickness of the wall, which he thought could be adequately defended by a small number of those unsuited for other service, while the rest would man the fleet. His particular concentration on the navy had its origin, I think, in his perception that the king's forces found it easier to attack by sea than by land. He considered the Piraeus more important than the upper city, and he would often advise the Athenians that if they were ever hard-pressed on land, they should go down to the Piraeus and take on the world with their ships. This, then, was the way in which the Athenians built their walls and took all other measures immediately after the Persian withdrawal.